And so, but we still have a lot of things, I think, in the way of governance. And I know that this is something that, even though me and you have known each other for a while, kind of where we started having a lot of really long conversations was on governance. And that's a dividend that's not going to really be paid, or a debt that's not going to be collected for probably another year for a lot of people, because they don't realize what, because things do appear so easy, and they're not, because like you said, with the throughput and everything, it's really easy to make a super base backend, and mismanage API calls, and I just had, there's one person on my platform and I had 15,000 API calls in a day, like, so you amplify that into something that's just you either have, Richie Rich as a brother, or you're just SOL. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I think that that's what I saw first, right? And I think that where you came from is really that sweet spot. Like you're interacting with developers, so you understand some of the vocabulary, and then you understand the business piece, and you're like sitting in the middle of it. And so if people are on one or the other, they need to go try to build that vocabulary and understanding from that other area, because that's really where we're sitting as like a human in the loop, as a bridge. We're a bridge between the coding agent and what the final output is, and what the business or the goal is that we're trying to achieve. And you're the one that is going to facilitate that. So if you're a solo operator, or if you're working at a company, you're still building an operating system, right? That you're operating in, or you're operating in together, and you're coagulating like different systems. And then really it's about standardizing those systems. It was just like in digital marketing, the biggest issue that we had previously was data fragmentation. Like data was all over the place. And also the biggest issue right now in moving into like OT is the data that is being produced is unclean. So even the or what you're talking about is about the penance, or that's not the right word, of just not utilizing your data properly. Like anybody that's using a CRM, there's a lot of people here that are using CRM. Is your data pristine? Right?
Yeah.
Would you trust your life on that data? All right. How up to date is it? How current it is? And, you know, like I know a lot of people that are using Salesforce or Hubstaff or whatever, but they're not using it the way that developers intended it to be used. And so the data is unclean and it can't be processed. Now you amplify that to using something on a physical device of like, a pump on a well. That data better be right, like because you're running all kind of math and heuristic, like that thing could blow up, right? Or something bad could happen. And so you got to trust the data, and you got to also, the latency is a really big issue there. But like all of these like sins, or I don't know what the right like frame is to think about this, but they're all going to come due. And
Yeah.
so from an operations background, the thing I zoned in on was like, oh my gosh, you got to have the governance set up right. And everybody's got to agree if you're working in an enterprise environment. And okay, why are these hallucinations, I can't even talk, happening? Well, it's because of bad data, or you didn't give it enough information. Like it's not the AI, it's the human user. And so I don't know. I doubled down on that. And then there's now regulatory laws that are coming down the pipe that people are not expecting. I'm going, okay, like, why don't, like, there's a period, it's September, but they might have pushed it out a little bit. On MotoPoint, I set up like a countdown timer because it's like, it's coming, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, get yourself ready, audit your tech stack, understand what's going on, map out your API calls, like bring your token usage down. Like it's going to be a win-win all around if you set up the system properly from the beginning and get everybody on board on that system. Because if not, the problems you're having, let's just use the CRM as something that everybody can follow, is going to get amplified. The problems are going to just get amplified with AI and the noise and degradation. And like you're just trying to fill up the context window of all this information. And, when you're talking to AI, after a certain amount of time, it like will compress the conversation, but you lose context and you were having this great conversation. And then, like now it doesn't even remember like what you said. And when I was using AI as a thinking partner a couple years ago, that was like the most frustrating thing ever. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I was in like this really good place, and you like wanted to keep that chat that way. And and then like I remember when chat GBT like 4.0, like they upgraded it and they took away the persistent memory. And that was when I switched to Claude. Like I was just like, I just lost my thinking partner and it can't remember anything.
No, but at least with Claude, like it would tell you, "Hey, start a new conversation." With ChatGPT, you'd be thinking nothing was wrong, and then you'd be like, "Wait, you just got a lot dumber." And to your point, so I was actually with a good friend of mine, Hank, and he's a vice president of treasury at a one of the bigger bank brands. And we were out one night and I was talking about, how, look, we have to, I've been so focused on the viewpoint of like not making a world where there wouldn't be hallucinations, because I thought that was the crux of enterprise. Because remember that I've just gone through my like odyssey of like coding the past year, so I kind of lost touch with like a little bit of my business acumen while I was in the hole. And he goes, "Ricky, they're not worried about the models hallucinating, they're scared of their own data." And just there was, that's in the top 5 most profound moments that I've had in the past year. And then to him, he's like, "Ricky, like what? Like, are you okay? Like, like, do you see something?" And I'm just like, mulling this over. And I'm like, dude, I never thought of that. And so as I'm working through these problems, I'm thinking about, okay, now we have to go back and we have to look at ingestion, and backtracking that to the point where at one point I was like just convinced that, hey, okay, we're just gonna have like shadow hospitals and like shadow billing companies, and like all they're gonna do is like, just basically sit there and be the like non-biased, like, okay, we're gonna decide what like has right authority and like what gets like saved as memory. Because when you think about it, there might have been that period of time where like Susan, was out on maternity leave, and so your books aren't, like you had a temp that was, doing bookkeeping. And so, those things that you don't really feel so much at the time, when you have something that can remember all of this and it's using those data points to the T, back then your CPA just came in at the end of the year. He said, "Oh, I'm going to fix these things," did some, magic with the numbers, or got you some, electric vehicle credits or something, and you were on your way, but when each data point, and that's where really I got frustrated too, was it was all or none. And that's where like my work has kind of been in memory is, it's either shaving everything down to fit one answer, or it's remembering everything and then what's the point, and it's the same thing with context. It's either taking everything too literal or like not remembering. I'm like, didn't we just, and so kind of threading that needle, and that's where, looking at that and back to my analogy of the forms, and making crystallization theory is basically, as you compound those answers and as more people in your network, validate those answers, and it has to have human right, like a human is the only one with right authority. That's another thing that kind of drives me crazy, is I'm such an efficiency person, but even I can't get through my head like, wait, we're saving all this time, so we can't use some of that saved time to like double check the work and like, like we want everything to compound learn and just get smarter. I like to say it gets smarter, but it doesn't get wiser. Like, so we're saying more and more and more, get it smarter, but I'll take, it being wise and being able to produce something, that has some merit that I didn't think of, or that and so that's kind of where I left with that, and I'm kind of losing my